I've been driving trucks for 20 years and I thought I'd seen it all. But that night on Highway 61 changed everything I thought I knew about the darkness that lurks on lonely roads. It was just past midnight when I first saw the flickering hazard lights in the distance. A solitary figure stood next to a sedan on the shoulder, arm outstretched in the universal sign for help. In this business, you develop a sixth sense for trouble, but nothing about the scene ahead raised any red flags. Just another stranded motorist on a deserted stretch of highway. I eased off the accelerator, my rig's headlights cutting through the inky blackness. The cool air rushing through my open window carried the scent of pine and damp earth. As I drew closer, I could make out more details. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit, his car's hood propped open. "What's the trouble?" I called out, bringing the truck to a stop about 20 feet behind the sedan. The man's response was lost in the rumble of my idling engine. I turned the key, plunging us into relative silence broken only by the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of crickets. "Sorry about that," I said, climbing down from the cab. "Engine trouble, He nodded, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Yeah, it just died on me out of nowhere. I've got no cell service out here. You wouldn't happen to have a phone I could use, would you?" Something in his tone made me pause. It wasn't quite right, a little too rehearsed, maybe. I've picked up countless stranded drivers over the years, and there's usually a note of relief in their voice. This guy sounded expectant. I took a step closer, my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Sure, I've got a sat phone in the cab. Let me just grab it for you." As I turned back toward my truck, movement caught my eye. Just the barest hint of a shadow shifting in the tree line that ran parallel to the highway. I froze, every instinct screaming danger. The man must have sensed my hesitation. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "Yeah, just remembered I left the phone in a weird spot. Give me a second to dig it out." I took another step toward my truck, hyper-aware of every sound around me. The rustle of leaves in the breeze, the man's shoes on gravel as he shifted his weight. And there, almost too faint to hear, the unmistakable sound of a twig snapping in the woods. My hand was on the door handle when I heard it, the metallic click of a gun being cocked. "That's far enough, driver," the man said, all pretense gone from his voice. "Turn around nice and slow." I did as he said, raising my hands. The sedan's headlights snapped on, momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the man had been joined by two others, both armed and wearing ski masks. "We don't want any trouble," the first man said, gesturing with his pistol. "Just hand over your wallet and the keys to your rig and you can walk away from this." I've heard stories of highway robberies like this, but I never thought it would happen to me. My mind raced, searching for a way out. The woods to my left were dark and dense. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. All right, I said, slowly reaching for my back pocket. "Just take it easy." The man's eyes narrowed. "Toss the wallet over here first." I pulled out my wallet and threw it at his feet. As he bent to pick it up, I made my move. I lunged for the open door of my truck, my fingers scrambling for the flare gun I keep mounted just inside. A shout went up behind me, followed by the deafening crack of gunfire. Something hot grazed my arm, but adrenaline dulled the pain. My hand closed around the flare gun. I spun, squeezing the trigger as I brought it up. The night exploded into brilliant red light as the flare screamed past the would-be hijackers. They dove for cover, momentarily blinded. I used the distraction to sprint for the tree line, my boots pounding against asphalt, then soft earth. Branches whipped at my face as I plunged into the underbrush. More gunshots rang out behind me, bullets thudding into tree trunks. I ran blindly through the darkness, my lungs burning. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but I didn't dare slow down. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I stumbled into a small clearing. Gasping for breath, I leaned against a tree and tried to get my bearings. The highway was nowhere in sight, and the woods were silent except for my ragged breathing. I fumbled for my phone, praying for a signal, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. A twig snapped nearby. I held my breath, straining to hear. Another snap, closer this time. They had found me. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My hand closed around a sturdy branch, and I hefted it like a club. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the clearing. I pressed myself against the tree, willing myself to become invisible. "I know you're out here, trucker," a voice called out. It was the first man, the one in the suit. "Why don't you come on out? We can talk about this like civilized folks." I remained silent, my grip tightening on the branch. "No? All right, have it your way." His voice hardened. "Boys, fan out. He can't have gone far." More flashlight beams joined the first, crisscrossing through the trees. I could hear them moving, getting closer with each passing second. My mind raced, trying to figure out a plan. I couldn't outrun them, not in this darkness, and even if I could, where would I go? A crazy idea formed in my mind. It was risky, but it was the only chance I had. I took a deep breath, then shouted as loudly as I could, "Over here! I found him!" For a moment there was silence. Then chaos erupted as the men started shouting and running toward my voice. I waited until the last possible second, then burst from my hiding spot, swinging my makeshift club wildly. I caught the nearest guy square in the face. He went down hard, his flashlight spinning away into the underbrush. The others were momentarily stunned, and I used that hesitation to my advantage. I snatched up the fallen man's gun and fired 2 quick shots into the air. The sound was deafening in the confines of the forest. "Police, drop your weapons." It was a desperate bluff, but in the confusion and darkness it worked. I heard panicked shouts and the sound of people crashing through the underbrush, running away from me. I didn't waste any time. I ran in the opposite direction, praying I was heading toward the highway. After what felt like an eternity, I burst out of the tree line, gasping and covered in scratches. To my immense relief, I saw headlights approaching in the distance. I stumbled onto the shoulder, waving my arms frantically. The car slowed, then pulled over. An older couple peered out at me, concern etched on their faces. "Are you all right, son?" the man asked, rolling down his window. I shook my head, still struggling to catch my breath. "No, I need help. Please, can you call the police?" The woman was already dialing on her cell phone. "What happened to you?" she asked. I leaned against their car, the events of the night crashing down on me. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I said, managing a weak smile. As we waited for the police to arrive, I kept a watchful eye on the dark woods. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. But underneath the fatigue was a new wariness, a hard-learned lesson about the dangers that can lurk on lonely highways. When the flashing lights of the police cruisers finally appeared, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. As I gave my statement to the officers, I couldn't help but think about how close I'd come to disaster. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I'd been a little slower or a little less lucky. The sun was peeking over the horizon by the time I was cleared to leave. My truck was still where I'd left it, untouched. As I climbed into the familiar cab, I realized something had fundamentally changed. The open road, once a source of freedom and endless possibility, now held a hint of menace. I started the engine, its rumble a comforting vibration beneath me. As I pulled back onto Highway 61, I made a silent vow. I'd keep driving. It's in my blood, after all. But I'd never again take for granted the darkness that lies between the familiar points of light. And maybe, just maybe, my story would serve as a warning to other drivers, a reminder to trust their gut when something doesn't feel right. Because out here on the highway, sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're standing right there in the open, waiting for someone to stop and lend a helping hand. Story 2, the notification ping jolted me awake. Another order. I groaned, checking the time on my phone, 11:47 p.m. So much for calling it an early night, but rent was due next week and I needed every dollar I could get. I swiped to accept the order, my tired eyes struggling to focus on the screen. The delivery address made me pause. It was way out on the edge of my zone, in an area I'd never been to before. The map showed it bordering on farmland. "Who orders food delivery out there?" I muttered, reaching for my jacket. The extra distance meant a better tip, I hoped. I grabbed my bike helmet and headed out into the chilly night air. The streets were eerily quiet as I pedaled through the city. Neon signs flickered in empty storefronts and the occasional car ghosted past, headlights cutting through wisps of fog. I shivered, picking up my pace. As I left the familiar grid of the city behind, streetlights became few and far between. The road narrowed, bordered by dense trees that seemed to lean in overhead. My bike light cast jumping shadows across the cracked asphalt. The app chimed, announcing I was approaching my destination. I slowed, peering at house numbers. Most of the properties were set far back from the road, barely visible behind overgrown hedges and rusted gates. Finally, I spotted it, number 1852. My heart sank as I took in the decrepit Victorian looming in the darkness. Paint peeled from weather-beaten siding and several windows were boarded up. The porch sagged ominously, rotting steps leading up to a door that hung slightly ajar. This couldn't be right. I double-checked the address on my phone, but there was no mistake. With a deep breath, I leaned my bike against a gnarled tree and grabbed the delivery bag. The overgrown yard was a minefield of hidden obstacles. I picked my way carefully through tall weeds, wincing as thorny vines caught at my ankles. An owl hooted somewhere nearby, making me jump. At the base of the porch steps, I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the food and run. But I needed that tip, and ratings were everything in this gig. Swallowing hard, I called out, "Hello? Food delivery." Silence. Not even a rustle from inside the house. I climbed the steps gingerly, wood creaking ominously underfoot. At the top, I tried again, louder this time. "Hello, I've got your order from Luigi's. Aye." A floorboard shifted inside, followed by a thump. I froze, straining to hear. Was that a muffled voice? "Hello?" I repeated, inching closer to the door. "Is everything okay in there?" Another thump, louder this time. Then, unmistakably, a cry for help, quickly muffled as if someone had clamped a hand over the speaker's mouth. My blood ran cold. I stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding. This wasn't happening. This was the kind of thing you read about online, not something that actually occurred in real life. But that cry had been real. Someone was in trouble. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands, ready to dial 911. But as the screen lit up, my stomach dropped. No signal. Of course there wasn't. I was in the middle of nowhere. Another thud from inside, followed by the sound of breaking glass. I had to make a decision. Every fiber of my being wanted to run, to get back on my bike and pedal as fast as I could toward civilization and cell reception. But if someone really was in danger... Before I could talk myself out of it, I eased the door open wider and slipped inside. The stench hit me first, musty and dank, with an undercurrent of something sickeningly sweet. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I took in my surroundings. The entryway opened into a large living room, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through grimy windows. Sheets draped bulky shapes that might have been furniture. Cobwebs hung in every corner. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. "Is anyone here? Do you need help?" A scraping noise came from upstairs, followed by a dull thud. I crept toward the staircase, every nerve on high alert. The steps groaned under my weight as I climbed, one hand on the dusty banister for balance. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched into darkness. Several doors lined each side, all closed except one at the far end that stood slightly ajar. A sliver of flickering light spilled from the crack. I inched down the hall, floorboards creaking traitorously beneath me. As I neared the open door, I could hear ragged breathing from within. My own breath caught in my throat as I eased the door open wider. The room beyond was lit by a single candle, its flame guttering in a pool of wax. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings and scrawled notes, connected by a web of red string. But it was the figure huddled in the corner that drew my attention. A woman sat bound to a chair, duct tape across her mouth and terror in her eyes. When she saw me, she began thrashing against her restraints, making frantic noises behind the gag. I rushed to her side, hands fumbling with the knots. "It's okay," I whispered, though my voice shook. "I'm going to get you out of here." As I worked to free her, my eyes darted around the room. A laptop glowed on a cluttered desk, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and takeout containers. A corkboard nearby was covered in photos, all of the same man in various locations. Some were clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. With a final tug, the ropes fell away. I peeled the tape from the woman's mouth as gently as I could. She gasped, sucking in great lungfuls of air. "Thank you," she choked out between sobs. "Oh God, thank you. We have to get out of here before he comes back." "Who?" I asked, helping her to her feet. Her legs buckled, and I had to support most of her weight. "Who did this to you?" My ex, she managed, her voice raw. He's been stalking me for months. I thought I was safe here, but he found me. He's completely lost it. A door slammed downstairs. We both froze, eyes locked in shared terror. He's back, the woman whispered. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. I looked around wildly for a weapon, anything we could use to defend ourselves. My eyes fell on a hefty paperweight on the desk. I lunged for it just as the door burst open. A man filled the doorway, his face contorted with rage. He was bigger than I'd expected, muscles bulging beneath a sweat-stained t-shirt. In one meaty hand, he clutched a wicked-looking hunting knife. "Who the fuck are you?" he snarled, eyes darting between me and the woman. I raised the paperweight, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let us go. The police are on their way." He laughed, a harsh bark devoid of humor. "Nice try, kid. No cops out here. No one to hear you scream." He lunged forward with surprising speed. I swung the paperweight, connecting with a sickening crunch. He staggered but didn't go down. The knife slashed across my forearm, drawing a line of fire. I cried out, stumbling backward. The woman seized her chance. She grabbed the candle and hurled it at her attacker. It struck him in the face, hot wax splattering. He roared in pain, clawing at his eyes. "Run!" I shouted, shoving the woman toward the door. We burst into the hallway, the man's enraged bellows echoing behind us. We flew down the stairs, feet barely touching the steps. I could hear him crashing after us, closing the distance. At the bottom, I grabbed a floor lamp and swung it like a baseball bat. It connected with a satisfying crack, buying us precious seconds. We sprinted for the front door, bursting out into the cool night air. I pointed to my bike. "Go, start pedaling, I'll catch up." The woman didn't hesitate. She leapt on the bike and took off down the driveway. I sprinted after her, heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I heard the front door splinter as our pursuer burst through. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning. The woman had reached the road and was picking up speed, just a little further. A hand seized the back of my jacket, yanking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked from my lungs. The man loomed over me, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The knife glinted in the moonlight as he raised it high. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I saw my whole life flash before my eyes, all the missed opportunities, the things I'd never get to do. Was this really how it was going to end? Murdered in a stranger's front yard because I'd accepted one last delivery? The knife plunged downward. I rolled, feeling it slice through my jacket and graze my ribs. Ignoring the pain, I kicked out with all my strength. My foot connected solidly with his knee. There was a sickening pop, and he went down with a howl of agony. I scrambled to my feet and ran. My legs felt like jelly, but terror lent me speed. I reached the road just as headlights appeared around the bend. The woman had flagged down a passing car. I dove into the back seat, yelling, "Go! Go!" The driver, an elderly man who looked utterly bewildered, stomped on the gas. As we peeled away, I saw our attacker limping down the driveway, screaming incoherently. We drove in shocked silence for several miles before the woman found her voice. "There's a police station in the next town," she said shakily. "About 10 minutes from here." I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off and every part of me ached, but we were alive. Against all odds, we'd made it out. As we approached the glowing lights of civilization, I let out a long, shuddering breath. I'd never been so glad to see a McDonald's in my life. I made a silent vow then and there. No more late-night deliveries. Some tips just weren't worth it. Story 3. The dash cam footage ended with a scream. That's when we knew this wasn't just another missing person case. I'd been a detective for 15 years, but nothing prepared me for that night on Highway 16. It started as a routine call. A state trooper had gone silent after a traffic stop. But as I stood there watching that grainy video in the patrol car's cabin, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The camera showed Trooper Sarah Martinez pulling over a dark sedan. Standard procedure. She approached the driver's side, exchanged a few words, then suddenly stiffened. Her hand went to her holster, but she never drew her weapon. Instead, she took a step back, her body language screaming tension. That's when things got weird. Martinez walked back to her cruiser, got in, and just sat there. For 5 long minutes, she stared straight ahead, not moving, not radioing in. Then, as if in a trance, she exited her vehicle and approached the sedan again. The last thing we saw was Martinez leaning into the driver's window. A hand shot out, grabbing her collar. Then that bone-chilling scream cut off as the camera went dark. I turned to my partner, Jack. What the hell did we just watch? He shook his head, his face pale in the glow of the cruiser's displays. I don't know, Tom, but we need to find her, now. We called for backup and started combing the area. The highway stretched out before us, a ribbon of black in the moonlight. Trees loomed on either side, their shadows concealing who knows what. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig set my nerves on edge. Hours passed. No sign of Martinez or the sedan. It was like they'd vanished into thin air. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, we regrouped at the station. The chief's face was grim as he addressed the assembled officers. We've got a missing trooper and a potential kidnapper on the loose. I want every available unit on this. Check traffic cams, talk to witnesses, leave no stone unturned. Let's bring Sarah home. I spent the next few days running on coffee and determination. We interviewed everyone who'd been on that stretch of highway that night. Most had seen nothing unusual, but one truck driver's story caught my attention. Yeah, I remember a dark sedan, he said, rubbing his stubbled chin. Passed me about an hour after midnight, driving erratic, like the guy was drunk or something. But here's the weird thing. I could have sworn I saw two people in the front seat. Then suddenly there was only one. I leaned forward, my heart racing. Can you describe the driver? He frowned, concentrating. It was dark, but male, I think. White. Had this look on his face, I don't know how to describe it. Empty, kinda, like there was nothing behind his eyes. A chill ran down my spine. I thanked the trucker and left, my mind whirling. What had happened on that highway? Where was Sarah Martinez? On day 5, we got a break. A gas station attendant in a small town about 100 miles north recognized the sedan from our bolo. Said the driver had stopped for fuel in the early hours of the morning after the disappearance. Guy gave me the creeps, the attendant told us, shifting nervously. Didn't say a word, just handed over cash and drove off. But I remember his eyes. They were wrong somehow, and there was something in the back seat, covered with a tarp. It was moving. My blood ran cold. I shared a look with Jack. We both knew what or who was likely under that tarp. We expanded our search radius, focusing on the rural areas north of the gas station. It was slow going. Miles of dense forest, scattered farms, and winding back roads. Every passing day decreased our chances of finding Sarah alive, but we couldn't give up. A week after the disappearance, an anonymous tip came in. A hunter reported seeing a dark sedan parked behind an abandoned barn off a dirt road deep in the woods. Jack and I were first on the scene with backup units minutes behind. As we approached the dilapidated structure, weapons drawn, I felt a sense of dread settling in my gut. The sedan was there, caked with mud and leaves. No sign of movement inside. "Police, come out with your hands up!" Jack's voice echoed in the stillness. No response. We moved closer, every sense on high alert. The barn door was ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I nodded to Jack and we entered, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The smell hit me first. Copper and decay. My stomach churned as my light fell on dark stains on the earthen floor. There was a rustle from the back of the barn and we swung our weapons toward the sound. "Show yourself!" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. A figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with those empty eyes the trucker had described. But it wasn't his appearance that made my heart stop. It was what he said. "I've been waiting for you, Detective Sullivan." I froze. How did he know my name? I'd never seen this man before in my life. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "You're wondering how I know you. I know a lot of things, Tom. I know about the nightmares you still have about that case in 09. I know about the drink you keep in your desk drawer. I know about the doubts that keep you up at night." My finger tightened on the trigger. "Where's Sarah Martinez?" He cocked his head, considering. "The trooper, she served her purpose. They all do in the end." "You son of a—" Jack started forward, but I held up a hand, stopping him. Something wasn't right here. This guy wasn't acting like a cornered criminal. He was too calm, too knowing. "What do you mean, they all do?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice level. The man's smile widened. You're asking the right questions now, Detective. Why don't you take a closer look at your partner? I glanced at Jack, confused. He met my gaze, his expression unreadable. Then, in a movement too fast to follow, he brought his gun up, pointing it at me. Jack, what the hell? I'm sorry, Tom, he said, and his voice was different somehow, flatter. But we can't let you interfere. My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Jack was my partner, my friend. We'd worked together for years. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw the same emptiness I'd seen in the suspects. Who are you people? I whispered. The gaunt man chuckled. We are the shepherds, Detective Sullivan. We guide humanity toward its true purpose. Some, like your friend here, see the truth and join us willingly. Others, like poor Sarah Martinez, require more persuasion. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. You're insane. Am I? Or have I simply seen beyond the veil of this reality? He stepped closer, his gaze boring into mine. You could join us, Tom. You have the potential. Let go of your doubts, your fears. Embrace a higher purpose. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a pull. A whisper in the back of my mind urging me to listen, to submit. Then I heard the wail of approaching sirens and the spell was broken. Backup's almost here, I said, my voice stronger now. It's over. The man sighed, looking almost disappointed. A pity. You would have made a fine addition to our ranks. He turned to Jack. Take care of this. We have work to do elsewhere. Before I could react, Jack's gun swung toward the man. 2 shots rang out and he crumpled to the ground. Then Jack turned back to me, his expression still eerily blank. Jack, don't do this, I pleaded. This isn't you. Fight it. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of my old partner in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that terrible emptiness. Goodbye, Tom, he said. I dove to the side as he fired. Pain exploded in my shoulder and I hit the ground hard. Through a haze of agony, I saw Jack walking calmly out of the barn. By the time backup arrived, he was long gone. The official report called it a tragic case of a cop gone rogue. They found Sarah Martinez's body buried behind the barn, along with evidence linking Jack to her murder and the disappearances of several other people along Highway 16. But I know the truth. I've seen behind the veil, glimpsed a world darker and stranger than most could imagine. And I know that somewhere out there, Jack and others like him are still working toward their higher purpose. As I sit here staring at the case files spread across my desk, I can't help but wonder, how deep does this conspiracy go? How many more are out there, hiding behind familiar faces? And most chilling of all, how long before they come for me again? The highway at night isn't just dark anymore. It's alive with shadows, and in those shadows something is watching, waiting. And I fear it's only a matter of time before it strikes again. Story 4. I always thought those home security commercials were ridiculous. You know the ones, where the family sits blissfully unaware while shadowy figures lurk outside. But that was before last Tuesday night when my phone buzzed with an alert that would change everything. It started like any other evening. I had just settled into my favorite armchair, a glass of red wine in one hand and the TV remote in the other. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the dishwasher and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Outside, a light drizzle tapped against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere that made me glad to be indoors. I was about to start the latest episode of my favorite true crime podcast when my phone vibrated aggressively on the side table. Annoyed at the interruption, I glanced at the screen, expecting another spam call or maybe a text from my sister. Instead, my blood ran cold as I read the notification. Alert, movement detected, front yard. My finger trembled slightly as I opened the app, bringing up the live feed from my outdoor security camera. At first, I saw nothing but my rain-slicked driveway and the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. Then, a figure emerged from the darkness, moving with purposeful stealth towards my front door. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding. The figure was dressed all in black, face obscured by a hood. As I watched, frozen, a second person appeared, then a third. They spread out, each approaching a different entry point to my home. This can't be happening, I thought. This is the kind of thing you see on the news, not in your own front yard. I lived in a quiet suburb, for God's sake. The most excitement we usually got was when Mrs. Henderson's cat escaped. I snapped out of my shock as I saw one of the figures testing my living room window. My mind raced. Should I call the police, try to scare them off, hide? With shaking hands, I pulled up my phone's dialer. Just as I was about to hit the call button, the screen went black. Confused, I tried to turn it back on. Nothing. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what had happened. They must have cut the phone lines. I lunged for the landline on the end table, already knowing what I'd find. Dead silence. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to think rationally. The security system was still working. It ran on a separate battery backup. But without a way to call for help, I was on my own. I crept to the window, carefully peering out through a gap in the curtains. The rain had picked up, obscuring my view, but I could make out dark shapes moving around my yard. One was at my car, probably making sure I couldn't use it to escape. A soft thud from the back of the house made me jump. They were testing the doors, looking for a way in. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found one. I had to do something, but what? I wasn't exactly John Wick. The closest thing I had to a weapon was a baseball bat gathering dust in my closet. Still, it was better than nothing. As quietly as I could, I made my way upstairs to retrieve the bat. Each creak of the floorboard sounded deafening in the tense silence. I winced, imagining the intruders hearing every move I made. Just as my hand closed around the smooth wood of the bat, a new sound froze me in place. The distinctive click of a lock being picked. They were in. My mind raced through options. I could try to barricade myself in a room, but then I'd be trapped. I could attempt to sneak out, but with them surrounding the house, I'd likely be caught. Or I could try to fight. None of the options seemed good, but I knew I had to choose. Fast. I opted for a mix of hiding and preparing to fight. The guest room had a solid oak door and a large wardrobe I could hide in if needed. Plus, it overlooked the backyard, potentially giving me an escape route. I slipped into the room, gently closing the door behind me. From downstairs, I could hear the soft tread of footsteps and low murmurs. They were being careful, methodical. This wasn't a random break-in. They were looking for something or someone. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped the bat. I positioned myself behind the door, ready to swing if it opened. Minutes ticked by, each second an eternity as I listened to them moving through my home. A floorboard creaked just outside the room. I held my breath, muscles tense. The doorknob slowly turned. In that moment, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Who were these people? What did they want? Would I see my family again? The door began to open and I raised the bat, ready to fight for my life. But then something unexpected happened. A voice called out from downstairs, urgent and annoyed. "We've got a problem. Abort." Now, the door stopped moving. I heard a muttered curse, then retreating footsteps. Confused but relieved, I remained frozen in place, afraid to move a muscle. Long minutes passed before I dared to peek out of the room. The house was silent. I crept downstairs, bat still clutched tightly, checking each room. They were gone, vanished as quickly and mysteriously as they had appeared. It wasn't until I reached the kitchen that I understood what had spooked them. There, stuck to my refrigerator with a magnet, was a bright yellow notice I had completely forgotten about. It was from the security company, stating they would be performing routine maintenance on the system tonight, which might trigger false alarms. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. There had been no intruders. The movement detected was likely just a technician doing their job. The shadowy figures in my yard, probably just trees swaying in the wind, distorted by rain on the camera lens. And the noises I heard? Most likely just the normal creaks and settling sounds of an old house, amplified by my fear-addled mind. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly weak. The bat clattered to the floor as relief warred with embarrassment. I had nearly brained some poor security technician with a baseball bat because I forgot to read a notice. As my racing heart began to slow, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, a grown man terrified out of my wits by a routine security check. I made a mental note to lay off the true crime podcasts for a while. But as my laughter faded, a small doubt niggled at the back of my mind. If it was just a false alarm, why had my phone died at that exact moment? And I could have sworn I heard multiple voices. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thoughts. It was over. I was safe. It was all just a misunderstanding, wasn't it? I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. When morning finally came, I called the security company to confirm what had happened. They apologized for the scare, explaining that there had indeed been a team out doing maintenance. They also mentioned that several houses in the area had reported similar false alarms. I nodded along, accepting their explanation, but a part of me remained uneasy. That night had felt too real, too terrifying to be just a simple misunderstanding. In the days that followed, I found myself double-checking the locks more often. I installed extra security cameras and a new, more sophisticated alarm system. Friends teased me about becoming paranoid, but I brushed off their concerns with a laugh and a shrug, because deep down I knew the truth. Whether those intruders were real or imagined, that night had taught me a valuable lesson. The world can be a dangerous place, and sometimes the line between safety and danger is thinner than we'd like to believe. Now, when I settle in for the night, I keep one eye on the security feed. And if my phone buzzes with an alert, you can bet I pay attention. Because next time, if there is a next time, I'll be ready. After all, it's better to be paranoid and prepared than to be the oblivious family in those home security commercials, because sometimes the monsters aren't just in our imagination. Sometimes they're right outside our door, waiting for us to let our guard down. Story 5. I should have kept driving. That's what I tell myself now, in the quiet moments when I can't sleep. If I'd just minded my own business, kept my eyes on the road and my foot on the gas, none of it would have happened. But I saw her there on the side of that lonely stretch of highway, and I couldn't just leave her behind. It was nearing midnight, and I'd been on the road for hours. The monotony of the drive had my eyelids drooping, and I was seriously considering pulling over at the next rest stop to catch a few hours of sleep. That's when I saw her. She appeared suddenly in my headlights, a pale figure against the inky darkness. Her arm was outstretched, thumb raised in the universal signal of a hitchhiker. As I got closer, I could see she was soaked to the skin, her blonde hair plastered to her face. She looked young, maybe early 20s, and absolutely terrified. I slowed down, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder as I pulled over. The smart thing would have been to keep going. I'd seen enough horror movies to know how this usually played out. But something in her eyes, wide with fear and desperation, made me stop. I rolled down the passenger window, heart pounding. "Are you okay?" I called out. She rushed to the car, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help." Up close, I could see she was shaking, whether from cold or fear I couldn't tell. Her clothes were torn in places, and there was a nasty-looking scrape on her cheek. Against my better judgment, I reached across and opened the passenger door. "Get in," I said. She scrambled into the car, pulling the door shut behind her with more force than necessary. The smell of wet earth and something metallic, blood, filled the small space. "Thank you," she breathed, hugging herself tightly. "Oh, God, thank you." I turned the heat up and grabbed a blanket from the back seat, handing it to her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She took the blanket with trembling hands, wrapping it around her shoulders. I don't know where to start. It's crazy. You'll think I'm insane." "Try me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "I've seen some pretty weird stuff in my day." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I was camping with some friends, just a weekend trip, you know. But last night, something happened. We were sitting around the fire and we heard this noise in the woods, like nothing I've ever heard before, this screech that made your blood run cold. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I nodded for her to continue. Jake went to check it out. We told him not to, but you know how guys can be. He wanted to prove he wasn't scared." She swallowed hard. "He didn't come back. We waited for hours, calling his name. Finally, when the sun came up, we went looking for him." Her voice broke, and she closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were filled with a haunted look that made her seem much older than her years. "We found pieces of him, scattered through the woods like something had torn him apart. There was so much blood." I felt my stomach lurch. "My God, did you call the police?" She shook her head frantically. "There's no signal out here. We tried to leave, to drive to the nearest town, but our cars wouldn't start. It was like something was keeping us there. And then we saw them." "Them?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I don't know what they were, not human, not animal, just shapes in the trees, watching us, hunting us." She was shaking again, her knuckles white as she clutched the blanket. They got the others. I ran. I've been running for hours. Please, we have to go. They might still be out there. I hesitated, my hand on the gear shift. Part of me wanted to get her to a hospital, or at least to the police, but a larger part, the part that had the hairs standing up on the back of my neck, just wanted to get as far away from here as possible. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. We drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from my passenger. "I'm Andy, by the way," I said, trying to break the tension. "Lily," she replied softly. "Thank you for stopping. I don't know what I would have done if—" She trailed off, her eyes fixed on something in the side mirror. I glanced over but saw only darkness. "What is it?" I asked. "I thought I saw." She shook her head. "Nothing. Just shadows." We lapsed back into silence. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every tree looked like it might be hiding something unnatural. After about 20 minutes, Lily suddenly sat up straight, her body tense. "Stop the car," she said urgently. "What? Why? Please, just stop." There was an edge of panic in her voice that made me obey without thinking. I pulled over, killing the engine. "What's wrong?" Lily was staring straight ahead, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. "We have to turn around," she whispered. "We can't go any further." "What are you talking about?" "We need to get you to a hospital or the police station." She turned to me then, her eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand. They're ahead. They're waiting for us." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's waiting for us?" "Them. The things from the woods. I can feel them. Please, we have to go back." I peered out into the darkness but saw nothing unusual, just the empty road stretching out before us, disappearing into the night. "Lily, there's nothing out there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're safe now. We're miles away from where I picked you up." She shook her head violently. No, you don't understand. They can move fast, faster than anything natural. They've gotten ahead of us somehow. If we keep going, we'll drive right into them." I was about to argue further when a flicker of movement caught my eye. Just at the edge of my headlights' reach, something dark seemed to dart across the road. It was there and gone so quickly I couldn't be sure I'd really seen it. My mouth went dry. "What was that?" Lily's only response was a choked sob. I started the engine, my hands shaking slightly. "Okay," I said. "Okay, we'll turn around. Just tell me if you see anything else." I executed a careful three-point turn, constantly scanning the darkness around us. As we headed back the way we came, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded. We drove in tense silence for several miles. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something terrible gaining on us, but there was only empty road behind us. Gradually, I began to relax. Maybe it had all been a product of an overactive imagination, fueled by Lily's terrifying story and the lateness of the hour. I was just about to suggest we turn around again and continue to the nearest town when I saw the headlights. They appeared suddenly around a bend, coming towards us fast, too fast, and they were weaving erratically across the road. "Hold on," I warned Lily, slowing down and moving to the far right of my lane. The oncoming car showed no signs of slowing. At the last second, I yanked the wheel hard to the right, sending us bumping onto the shoulder. The other vehicle screamed past us, missing us by inches. In the brief moment it took to pass, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man with wide, terrified eyes, his mouth open in a silent scream. "Oh, God!" Lily whispered. "They're behind us now." I twisted in my seat to look out the rear window. The other car had skidded to a stop about 100 yards back. Its headlights illuminated a scene straight out of a nightmare. Dark shapes moved at the edge of the light, circling the stranded vehicle. They were vaguely humanoid, but moved with a fluidity that was all wrong. As I watched in horror, one of the shapes broke from the pack and loped towards us with impossible speed. "Drive!" Lily screamed. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires spinning in the loose gravel before finding purchase. We shot forward, engine roaring as I pushed it to its limits. "Faster!" Lily urged, her eyes fixed on the side mirror. "They're coming!" I risked a glance in the rearview mirror and immediately wished I hadn't. The shapes were gaining on us, moving with a speed that defied physics. I could make out more details now. Elongated limbs, hairless skin that seemed to absorb the light, and faces, if you could call them faces. They were featureless voids save for rows of needle-sharp teeth. "What do we do?" I shouted, struggling to keep the car on the road as we took curves at dangerous speeds. "I don't know," Lily sobbed. "I don't know." The shapes were right behind us now. I could hear a sound over the roar of the engine, a high-pitched keening that set my teeth on edge. Something slammed into the back of the car, nearly sending us into a spin. In desperation, I clicked on the high beams. The road ahead was suddenly flooded with light, and I heard an inhuman shriek of pain from behind us. The impacts on the car ceased. "The light!" Lily gasped. "They can't stand the light." I pressed down harder on the accelerator, praying the engine wouldn't give out. We flew down the highway, the needle on the speedometer creeping ever higher. In the rearview mirror, I could see the shapes falling behind, retreating from the glare of the headlights. We drove like that for what felt like hours, neither of us daring to speak. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, we saw signs of civilization, billboards, exit ramps, the glow of a town in the distance. As we pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, I finally let myself relax. We'd made it. We were safe. I turned to Lily, 1,000 questions on my lips, but the words died in my throat. The passenger seat was empty. There was no sign that anyone had ever been there, no wet clothing, no muddy footprints. Even the blanket I'd given her was neatly folded in the back seat where I'd left it. As I sat there trying to make sense of what had happened, a chill ran down my spine. In the growing light of dawn, I could see something on the passenger side window, words written in the condensation from the inside. "Thank you, keep driving, they're still out there." I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, heading towards the rising sun. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night, but I do know one thing. I'll never pick up another hitchhiker as long as I live. Story 6. The blood on my rearview mirror wasn't the worst part. It was the moment I realized I couldn't pull over, couldn't run, couldn't do anything but keep driving into the night with a killer in my back seat. My name's Alex, and I've been an Uber driver in the city for about 3 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me time to work on my music during the day. I've had my share of weird passengers. The drunk, the overly chatty, the ones who think your car is their personal karaoke booth. But nothing could have prepared me for that Thursday night. It was just past midnight, and I was thinking about calling it quits when the app pinged. One last ride, I told myself. The pickup was in a quiet residential area, nothing unusual there. As I pulled up to the curb, I saw a man pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. He was average height, maybe in his 30s, wearing a dark hoodie despite the warm night. "Hey there," I called out as he approached. "You Mark?" He nodded, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, that's me." Something about his demeanor set me on edge, but I brushed it off. Working nights, you get all types. "Hop in," I said, forcing a smile. "Where are we headed?" Mark slid into the back seat, a large duffel bag clutched to his chest. "Just start driving north. I'll direct you as we go." Red flag number 1. I prefer when passengers put in a destination, but it's not unheard of for someone to guide you along the way. Still, combined with his nervous energy, it made me uneasy. "Sure thing," I replied, pulling away from the curb. "Long night?" He grunted in response, so much for small talk. We drove in silence for about 10 minutes, the only sound the soft jazz playing on the radio. The city streets gave way to suburbs, then to darker, less populated areas. Every now and then, Mark would mutter a direction. "Turn left here," or "keep going straight." I tried to keep things light, making the occasional comment about the weather or the lack of traffic. Mark responded with monosyllables when he bothered to respond at all. The unease in my gut grew with every mile. We were on a lonely stretch of road, trees looming on either side, when Mark finally spoke up. "Pull over up ahead. I need to make a quick stop." I hesitated. We were in the middle of nowhere, no buildings or houses in sight. Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea. Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a rest stop about 5 miles up if you need a bathroom or something." "No," he said sharply. "Pull over here. Now." The tension in the car was palpable. I considered flooring it, but where would I go? We were miles from anywhere, and I had no idea if this guy was armed. Slowly, I eased the car onto the shoulder. Mark got out, taking his duffel bag with him. He disappeared into the trees at the side of the road. I sat there, engine idling, fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. What the hell was going on? 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was about to call it quits and drive off when Mark emerged from the woods. The duffel bag looked heavier now, and he was struggling to carry it. As he approached the car, I caught a glimpse of something dark and wet on his hands. My heart began to race. This wasn't right. None of this was right. Mark tossed the bag into the back seat and climbed in after it. "Drive," he commanded. "Head towards the interstate." I put the car in gear, mind whirling. What should I do? Call the cops? But my phone was in its mount on the dashboard. There was no way to reach it without Mark noticing. We drove in tense silence for several minutes. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at the bag without being obvious. That's when I saw it, a dark stain spreading across the seat, seeping from the duffel bag. My blood ran cold. I knew without a doubt what that stain was. Mark must have noticed my expression change. "Eyes on the road," he snapped. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stare straight ahead. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel. "Think, Alex, think. There has to be a way out of this." "So," I said, struggling to keep my voice casual. "Long night, huh? What do you do for work?" Mark's eyes met mine in the mirror. They were cold, devoid of emotion. "You ask too many questions. Just making conversation," I said quickly. "It's part of the job, you know." He leaned forward, his face inches from my ear. "Your job is to drive. That's it. Understand?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The smell hit me then. Copper and something worse. My stomach churned. We drove on, the silence in the car broken only by the occasional direction from Mark and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. I kept racking my brain for a plan, any plan. Could I crash the car? No, too risky. Flag down another driver? But the road was deserted. As we approached the interstate, a crazy idea formed. It was dangerous, probably stupid, but it was all I had. "Hey," I said, forcing a note of confusion into my voice. "I think something's wrong with the car. It's pulling to the right." Mark's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, man. Might be a flat tire. I should pull over and check it out." "No," he said firmly. "Keep driving." I shook my head. "Look, I can't take this onto the interstate if there's something wrong. It's not safe. I'm going to have to stop." Before he could protest further, I guided the car onto the next exit ramp. There was a gas station just off the highway, brightly lit, and, thank God, open 24 hours. "What are you doing?" Mark hissed as we pulled into the lot. "Relax," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I'll just do a quick check, 5 minutes tops." I parked near the storefront, making sure we were in full view of the windows. As I reached for the door handle, Mark's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "Don't try anything stupid," he growled. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Just checking the tires. I'll be right back." As soon as my feet hit the pavement, I took a deep breath. It was now or never. I made a show of checking the front tire, then slowly worked my way around to the back of the car. When I was sure I was out of Mark's line of sight, I sprinted for the store entrance. The bell jingled as I burst through the door, startling the sleepy-looking clerk behind the counter. "Call 911, I gasped. "There's a killer in my car." The clerk blinked at me, uncomprehending. "What?" "Please," I begged. "Just call the police. Now." Something in my voice must have convinced him. He reached for the phone. I risked a glance out the window. Mark was still in the car, but he was turned around, clearly looking for me. Any second now, he'd realize what was happening. The next few minutes were a blur. The clerk speaking urgently into the phone. Mark getting out of the car, his face a mask of rage. Me grabbing the fire extinguisher from the wall, ready to defend myself if he came inside. But he didn't. As soon as Mark saw me through the window, he knew the game was up. He ran to the driver's side door, yanked it open, and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching. By the time the police arrived, he was long gone. They took my statement, documented the blood in my car, and put out an APB. I spent hours at the station going over every detail of that terrible ride. They found my car abandoned about 20 miles away. The duffel bag was gone. To this day, I don't know what or who was inside it. Part of me doesn't want to know. It's been 6 months since that night. I don't drive for Uber anymore. Can't bring myself to pick up strangers to wonder if the next passenger might be another Mark. The police never caught him. Sometimes I lie awake at night, remembering those cold eyes in my rearview mirror, wondering if he's still out there. Every time I see a dark sedan on the road, my heart races. Every unexpected noise makes me jump. I know logically that the chances of running into Mark again are slim, but logic doesn't help much when you've stared into the face of true evil. I still drive, but never at night. And I always check the back seat before I get in, because now I know the truth. Sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under your bed or in the shadows. Sometimes they're sitting right behind you, and all you can do is keep driving and pray you make it through the night. Story 7. I never thought accepting a late-night Uber request would land me in the middle of a crime scene, but that's exactly what happened on a rainy Tuesday night in October, turning what should have been a routine pickup into the most terrifying ride of my life. The ping came through just after 11 p.m. I'd been about to call it a night, but the surge pricing tempted me into one last fare. The pickup location was in a part of town I didn't know well, mostly warehouses and industrial lots. Not the kind of place you'd expect someone to need a ride from this late, but hey, I don't judge. Maybe it was a night shift worker or something. I pulled up to the address, an unmarked building with boarded-up windows. No passenger in sight. I was about to cancel the ride when movement caught my eye. A figure darted out from behind the building, head swiveling left and right before sprinting towards my car. The back door flew open and a man practically dove into the seat. "Go, go, go," he shouted, his voice tight with panic. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the gear shift. Something felt off. Are you Mark?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah, that's me," he said quickly. "Please, we need to leave now." Against my better judgment, I put the car in drive. As we pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man, definitely not the Mark from the profile picture, was hunched down in the seat, peering nervously out the back window. That's when I saw them. 2 other men bursting out of the building, shouting and waving their arms. One of them was holding something that glinted in the streetlights. My blood ran cold as I realized it was a gun. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Just drive," the man in the back yelled. "I'll double your fare, triple it, whatever, just get us out of here." My mind raced. This guy was clearly in trouble, possibly dangerous. But those men chasing us didn't look like cops. If I stopped now, I might be putting myself in the middle of something ugly. I made a split-second decision and floored it. The engine roared as we sped down the empty street. In the mirror, I saw a car peel out from a side alley, headlights flicking on as it gave chase. "Care to tell me what I've gotten myself into?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice as I took a sharp turn onto a main road. The man was rummaging through a backpack. "Trust me, the less you know, the better," he said. "Just lose them and get me to the address I put in the app." I checked the GPS. The destination was clear across town, a good 30-minute drive in normal traffic. But this was far from normal. The pursuing car was gaining on us. I weaved through what little traffic there was, ignoring red lights and stop signs. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "They're getting closer," I said, gripping the wheel tighter. "I don't suppose you want to consider turning yourself in?" He barked out a harsh laugh. "Not an option. Look, I'm sorry you got dragged into this, but I need you to focus on driving. Can you lose them?" I gritted my teeth. "I can try. I'd driven these streets for years as an Uber driver, but I'd never pushed my sedan to its limits like this." We fishtailed around corners, engine screaming as I pushed it harder than I thought possible. The car behind us matched every move, never more than a few car lengths behind. We burst onto the highway, weaving between the sparse late-night traffic. I checked the mirror again and my stomach dropped. There were now 2 cars in pursuit. "This isn't working," I said, knuckles white on the wheel. "We need a new plan." The man leaned forward, his face appearing next to mine in the rearview mirror. "Take the next exit. I know a place we can hide." I wanted to argue, to demand more information, but the urgency in his voice made me comply. I cut across 2 lanes of traffic, ignoring the blaring horns, and shot down the exit ramp. We found ourselves in a maze of narrow streets lined with warehouses and abandoned factories. The man directed me through a series of turns, each one feeling like we were diving deeper into a trap. "There!" he suddenly shouted, pointing at a decrepit building. "Pull in behind it!" I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching as we skidded to a stop in a trash-strewn alley. The man was out of the car before I'd fully stopped, rushing towards a rusted door. "Come on," he yelled. "They'll be here any second." Every instinct told me to floor it, to leave this guy and his trouble behind. But curiosity and a misplaced sense of duty made me kill the engine and follow him. The door led to a cavernous space filled with shadows and the musty smell of abandonment. My passenger moved with purpose, leading me to a small office in the back. He quickly closed the door behind us and slumped against it, breathing heavily. "Okay," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I think I've earned some answers. Who are you, and what the hell is going on?" He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the room. "My name's not Mark, it's Alex. Those guys chasing us? Let's just say they're not happy about some information I acquired." "Information?" I repeated. "What, are you some kind of corporate spy or something?" Alex's laugh was bitter. "I wish it was that simple. No, what I've got is much bigger. The kind of thing that could bring down some very powerful people." Before I could press for more details, the sound of screeching tires echoed through the building. Alex tensed, putting a finger to his lips. Heavy footsteps and angry voices filled the air. They were inside, searching. I held my breath, painfully aware of how loud my heartbeat seemed in the silence of our hiding spot. "Check every room," a gruff voice commanded. "He's in here somewhere." Alex was furiously tapping at his phone. I opened my mouth to ask what he was doing, but he shook his head violently, eyes pleading for silence. The footsteps grew closer. A shadow passed under the door. I closed my eyes, certain we were about to be discovered. Then miraculously, the shadow moved on. After what felt like an eternity, the voices and footsteps faded. They were leaving. I let out a shaky breath. That was close. What now? Alex's phone buzzed. He read the message, his face lighting up with relief. "Now we wait. Help is on the way." "Help? What kind of help?" I asked, but Alex just shook his head. "The less you know, the safer you are," he said. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this. I never meant for an innocent person to get involved." We sat in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 20 minutes. Suddenly, new voices echoed through the building. Alex perked up, listening intently. "It's okay," he said after a moment. "These are the good guys." The office door opened, revealing two men in suits. They nodded at Alex, then turned to me. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us," one of them said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The next few hours passed in a blur. I was taken to a nondescript office building and questioned extensively about the night's events. They were particularly interested in what Alex had told me, which wasn't much. Finally, as dawn was breaking, they let me go with a stern warning not to discuss what had happened with anyone. A car was waiting to take me home. As I sank into my own bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thank you for your help tonight. Your actions may have saved more lives than you know. The world is a safer place because of you." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to process everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as some elaborate prank or misunderstanding, but I knew deep down that it had been all too real. In the days that followed, I scoured the news for any hint of what Alex's information might have been about. There were no big scandals or government shakeups. Whatever it was, it had been handled quietly. I kept driving for Uber, but something had changed. Every ping, every passenger carried a new weight of possibility. What secrets might they be carrying? What unseen dangers lurked behind each pickup request? I'll never know the full story of what happened that night. But I do know this. Sometimes being an Uber driver means more than just getting people from point A to point B. Sometimes it means being an unwitting participant in events much bigger than yourself. And sometimes it means making a difference in ways you never could have imagined. So now, when I start my shift and that first ride request comes in, I take a deep breath and remind myself, every ride is an adventure, for better or for worse. And you never know when you might accidentally become a hero. Story 8. I never thought a simple lane change could be a matter of life and death. But as I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, heart pounding in my chest, I realized how quickly an ordinary drive could turn into a nightmare. It started as just another mind-numbing commute. I was running late for an important meeting, weaving through the morning traffic with one eye on the clock. The radio droned on about gridlock and accidents, but I tuned it out, focused on finding any gap I could squeeze into. That's when I saw it, a break in the left lane. Without thinking, I flicked on my turn signal and started to merge. Too late, I noticed the sleek black SUV barreling up behind me, way over the speed limit. I jerked back into my lane, but not before hearing the blare of a horn and the screech of brakes. My heart skipped a beat as I checked the rearview mirror. The SUV had barely avoided rear-ending me, and now it was riding my bumper so close I couldn't even see its headlights. A chill ran down my spine as I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man with a face twisted in rage, mouth moving in what I was sure were obscenities. "I'm sorry," I muttered, even though he couldn't hear me. It was an accident. I sped up a little, hoping to put some distance between us. But the SUV matched my speed, staying right on my tail. Every time I changed lanes, it followed. My palms were sweating now, leaving damp marks on the steering wheel. After a few minutes of this, I started to relax a little. Maybe he was just trying to scare me, teach me a lesson. Surely he'd get bored soon and move on. That hope evaporated as we approached an exit ramp. I wasn't planning to get off here, but at the last second I made a snap decision. I'd take the exit, let him go on his way, and then get back on the highway. Problem solved. I signaled and started to move over. That's when the SUV suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside me. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the driver clearly for the first time. He was older than I'd thought, probably in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face lined with years of anger. But it was his eyes that terrified me, cold and hard as steel, filled with a hatred that seemed to go far beyond a simple traffic incident. As I watched in horror, he jerked his steering wheel towards me. I reacted on instinct, swerving hard to the right. My tires hit the rumble strip, the vibration jolting through my body. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to lose control. Somehow I managed to straighten out, but now I'd missed the exit. The SUV fell back behind me, but I could feel those eyes boring into the back of my head. My mind raced. What had I done to provoke this level of rage? Sure, I'd cut him off, but it was an accident. This reaction was insane, dangerous. I needed to get away from this maniac. I spotted a sign for the next town, still 10 miles away. Could I make it that far? I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my old sedan to speeds it hadn't seen in years. The engine whined in protest, but I didn't let up. In my rearview mirror, I saw the SUV matching my speed effortlessly. Of course, his vehicle was newer, more powerful. I couldn't outrun him. My eyes darted to my cell phone, sitting in the cup holder. I could call for help. But as soon as the thought crossed my mind, I saw the SUV pull up alongside me again. The man was gesturing furiously, pointing at me, then making a slashing motion across his throat. The message was clear. If I tried to call anyone, things would get much worse. I nodded, hoping he'd see I understood. He fell back again, but stayed close behind. My exit was coming up soon. Maybe if I could just get off the highway, find a police station or a crowded area. But as we neared the exit, the SUV suddenly accelerated, cutting me off. I slammed on the brakes, heart in my throat, as he swerved in front of me. We were going too fast. I was sure he'd lose control, that we'd both go spinning off the road. Somehow, he managed to straighten out. Now he was directly in front of me, brake lights flashing as he slowed. I was being boxed in, forced to reduce speed. We crawled along at a snail's pace, other cars whizzing past us. I was hyper-aware of every detail. The sweat trickling down my back, the tremble in my hands, the rapid rise and fall of my chest as I struggled to breathe normally. Up ahead, I could see my exit approaching. It was now or never. I had to make a break for it. Just before the exit, there was a brief gap in the traffic to my left. Without signaling, I couldn't give him any warning. I yanked the wheel hard, accelerating into the space. For a moment, I thought I'd made it. Then I heard the roar of an engine and a sickening crunch of metal. The SUV had followed me, clipping my rear bumper. My car fishtailed wildly, and I fought to keep it under control. Somehow I managed to make the exit, tires squealing as I took the turn too fast. But the SUV was right behind me, seemingly unscathed by the collision. The exit ramp led to a 2-lane road cutting through farmland. No buildings in sight, no other cars, just me and my pursuer. Panic clawed at my throat. What was I going to do? I couldn't outrun him, couldn't call for help. I was trapped. That's when I saw it. A sign for a town just 2 miles ahead. If I could make it there, surely I'd find help. People. Safety. I pushed my car to its limits, the engine screaming in protest. The SUV kept pace easily, sometimes pulling alongside as if to remind me he could end this whenever he wanted. The 2 miles felt like 200. Every second was agony, waiting for the final blow to fall. But somehow, miraculously, I started to see buildings ahead, the outlying streets of the town. Hope surged through me. I was going to make it. I just needed to find the police station or even just a crowded area, somewhere this madman couldn't follow. That's when I saw the railroad crossing ahead, lights flashing, gates starting to come down. A train was coming. Time seemed to slow down. I had a split-second decision to make: try to beat the train, risking a deadly collision, or stop and be at the mercy of my pursuer. In that moment, some reckless, desperate part of my brain took over. I floored it. The gates were almost down. The train's horn blared, deafeningly loud. I could see the horror on the engineer's face as my car hurtled towards the tracks. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact. There was a tremendous noise, the screech of brakes, the blare of the horn, the crunch of metal. But it wasn't me. I opened my eyes to find myself on the other side of the tracks, whole and unharmed. Behind me, the train screeched to a halt, and there, caught between the gates, was the black SUV. It had been following so closely that when I made my mad dash across the tracks, the driver hadn't had time to react. The train had caught the rear end of the vehicle, spinning it around. As I watched, dazed, the driver's door opened. The man stumbled out, looking stunned. Our eyes met across the tracks, and for a moment I saw something shift in his gaze. The rage drained away, replaced by, what, shock? Remorse? I couldn't tell. Then people were swarming around, the train engineer, passengers, locals who'd heard the commotion. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. I should have stayed, should have given a statement to the police, explained what had happened. But some primal instinct for self-preservation kicked in. Before anyone could stop me, I put my car in gear and drove away, hands shaking so badly I could barely steer. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of how a simple mistake had escalated so quickly, had nearly cost both of us our lives. Eventually, I found my way home. As I pulled into my driveway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. I hardly recognized the person staring back at me, pale, wide-eyed, aged somehow by the experience. I made a vow then and there. Life was too short, too precious to waste on anger. From that day forward, I promised myself I'd be a different driver. A different person, more patient, more forgiving, because you never know when a simple lane change might be a matter of life and death. Story 9. The muddy footprints led upstairs, each one a silent scream in the darkness of my home. I stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the intruder could hear it. My phone lay on the kitchen counter, tantalizingly out of reach, and the faint sounds of movement from my bedroom sent chills down my spine. This was supposed to be a quiet night at home, not a fight for survival. It had started as a typical Tuesday evening. I'm Sarah, a 32-year-old graphic designer who works from home. After a long day hunched over my computer, I'd treated myself to takeout from my favorite Thai place. The delivery was late, but the pad Thai was worth the wait. I'd settled on the couch with my food and a trashy reality show, content to let my brain turn to mush for a few hours. It must have been around 11 p.m. when I heard the noise. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or maybe the neighbor's cat knocking over a trash can again. But then came the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. My first thought was that it must be a mixed-up food delivery. It wouldn't be the first time. Just last month, a pizza meant for the house 2 doors down had ended up on my porch. I muted the TV and called out, "Hello? I think you might have the wrong house." Silence. A shiver ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. I got up slowly, my sock-clad feet silent on the hardwood floor. The living room opened onto a small foyer, and from where I stood, I could see the front door standing ajar. A cool breeze filtered in, carrying with it the scent of rain and wet earth. "Hello?" I called again, my voice smaller this time. That's when I saw them. Muddy footprints leading from the doorway into my home. My breath caught in my throat. This was no delivery mix-up. Fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I found myself moving towards the kitchen. My phone was there, charging on the counter. If I could just reach it, call 911. A floorboard creaked overhead. I froze, my hand halfway to the phone. Someone was upstairs, in my bedroom. Time seemed to stand still as I stood there, caught between the safety of my phone and the threat lurking above. My mind raced through possibilities. Could I make it to the phone and call for help before the intruder came downstairs? Should I run out the front door and hope my neighbors were home? Before I could decide, I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate moving across the upstairs hallway. They were coming towards the stairs. Panic surged through me. I couldn't let them find me here, exposed in the open space of the kitchen and living room. On instinct, I ducked into the small half-bath off the foyer, easing the door shut behind me with trembling hands. The bathroom was tiny, barely big enough for a toilet and sink. I pressed myself against the wall next to the door, trying to control my ragged breathing. From here, I could hear everything, each creak of the stairs as the intruder descended, the soft squelch of wet shoes on hardwood. My mind whirled with questions. Who was this person? What did they want? Had they targeted me specifically, or was I just a random victim? The not knowing was almost worse than the danger itself. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, pausing for a moment. I held my breath, certain that even the slightest sound would give me away. Then, to my horror, the steps began moving towards the bathroom. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. The best I could find was a plunger propped in the corner. I gripped it tightly, knowing how pathetic it would be against an actual threat, but needing something, anything, to make me feel less helpless. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could see the shadow of feet in the gap beneath it. My whole body tensed, ready to swing the plunger with all my might the moment the door opened. But it didn't open. Instead, I heard a sort of sniffing sound, as if the intruder was smelling the air. Then slowly the feet turned away. The footsteps moved towards the kitchen. I let out a shaky breath, my knuckles white around the plunger handle. What now? I couldn't stay in this bathroom forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to make a move. As if in answer to my thoughts, I heard a clatter from the kitchen, the sound of my phone falling to the floor. The intruder must have found it. Any hope I had of calling for help vanished. Tears of frustration and fear pricked at my eyes. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, not in quiet neighborhoods like mine. Yet here I was, cowering in my own bathroom while a stranger roamed my house. I don't know how long I stood there, every muscle tense, straining to hear any sound of movement. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. Finally, I heard footsteps again, this time moving towards the front of the house. The front door opened, then closed. Silence fell. Had they left? I wanted desperately to believe it, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. What if it was a trick? What if they were waiting just outside, hoping I'd emerge from my hiding place? I'm not sure what finally gave me the courage to move. Maybe it was the growing discomfort of standing in one position for so long, or maybe it was the realization that I couldn't stay in this bathroom forever. Whatever the reason, I found myself slowly, silently, easing the door open. The house was dark and still. I crept out, plunger still clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The living room was as I'd left it, the muted TV casting a bluish glow over the scene. Nothing seemed out of place. I made my way to the kitchen on trembling legs. My phone lay on the floor, its screen dark. With shaking hands, I picked it up and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. Dead. Whether from the fall or by the intruder's design, I couldn't say. A sudden sound from upstairs made me jump, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. It was a sort of rustling, like someone moving around. They hadn't left after all. My eyes darted to the front door. It was right there. I could make a run for it, be out of the house in seconds. But the thought of turning my back, of not knowing if the intruder was right behind me, I couldn't do it. Instead, I found myself moving towards the stairs, plunger raised like a club. Some distant part of my mind screamed at me to stop, to run, to do anything but go towards the danger. But a stronger part needed to know, needed to confront whoever was in my home. I climbed the stairs slowly, wincing at every creak. The rustling sound grew louder as I approached my bedroom. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the gap. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was a mess. Drawers had been pulled out, their contents strewn across the floor. The window was open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. And there, silhouetted against the moonlight, was a figure. For a moment, we both froze, staring at each other. Then several things happened at once. The figure lunged towards me. I swung the plunger with all my might. And from downstairs came the sound of splintering wood as the front door burst open. "Police! Don't move!" The shout came just as my makeshift weapon connected with the intruder's head. They stumbled off balance, and I took the opportunity to dart past them, nearly falling down the stairs in my haste. I collided with a police officer at the bottom of the stairs, babbling incoherently about intruders and plungers. It was only when I heard the sounds of a scuffle upstairs, followed by the sharp click of handcuffs, that the reality of the situation began to sink in. The next few hours passed in a blur of questions and statements. The intruder, it turned out, was a serial burglar who'd been targeting homes in the area for weeks. A neighbor had spotted him entering my house and called the police. As dawn broke, I sat on my front porch, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving me feeling drained and oddly hollow. An officer approached, holding out a cup of coffee. "You did good in there," he said, his voice kind. Not many people would have had the courage to confront an intruder like that. I managed a weak smile, accepting the coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. "Guess all those hours of playing whack-a-mole as a kid finally paid off." He chuckled. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to normal. As I sipped the too-hot coffee and watched the sun rise over my quiet street, I knew things would never be quite the same. But I also knew I was stronger than I'd ever realized. Whatever came next, I'd face it head-on, preferably without a plunger this time. Story 10. I've patrolled this stretch of highway for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for the night I stopped to help a stranded motorist. What started as a routine assist quickly spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. It was a quiet Tuesday night, the kind where the monotony of the empty road can lull you into a false sense of security. The clock on my dash read 2:17 a.m. when I spotted the hazard lights blinking weakly in the distance. As I drew closer, I could make out a sedan pulled onto the shoulder, its hood up like a surrender flag. I flipped on my cruiser's lights and pulled in behind the vehicle, following protocol to the letter. It was an older model Chevy, worn but not decrepit. Nothing that screamed trouble at first glance. "Evening, folks," I called out as I approached, one hand resting casually on my holster, a habit born of years on the job. "Having some car trouble?" A man emerged from the driver's side, his face half hidden in shadow. "Oh, thank God," he said, relief evident in his voice. "We've been stuck out here for hours. Cell phone's dead, and we haven't seen another soul." As he stepped into the glow of my headlights, I got a better look at him. Mid-40s, I'd guess, with the kind of weathered face that speaks of a hard life. His clothes were rumpled, like he'd been sleeping in them. "We?" I asked, noticing movement in the back seat. "My wife and kid," he explained, gesturing toward the car. "Little one's been sleeping, thank heaven for small mercies." I nodded, my training kicking in as I assessed the situation. "Mind if I take a look under the hood?" He waved me forward, and I moved to the front of the car, keeping one eye on the man. Years on the force teach you to never let your guard down, even in seemingly innocent situations. The engine was a mess of corroded parts and frayed wires. I'm no mechanic, but even I could tell this car hadn't seen proper maintenance in years. "Looks like you might have a problem with your alternator," I said, straightening up. "I can call a tow truck for you, get you folks to the nearest town." That's when I noticed it. A slight tensing in the man's shoulders, a flicker of something in his eyes. It was subtle, the kind of thing you only pick up on after years of reading people in high-stress situations. "Actually, officer," he said, his tone shifting ever so slightly, "I think we've got it under control now. Must have just been a loose connection or something." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something wasn't right here. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," I said, my hand moving back to my holster. He hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. "Of course, officer. It's in the car. Let me just grab it." As he turned toward the vehicle, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. There, on the backseat floor, partially hidden by a blanket, was a duffel bag, and poking out from its half-zipped opening was the unmistakable grip of a handgun. Time seemed to slow down. My training kicked in, and I drew my weapon in one fluid motion. "Sir, step away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them." The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. But instead of fear or surprise on his face, I saw something far more chilling. Resignation. "I'm sorry, officer," he said softly. "I truly am, but I can't let you do this." Before I could react, the back door of the car flew open. I caught a flash of movement, then a searing pain exploded in my shoulder. The impact knocked me back, my gun clattering to the asphalt. Through a haze of pain, I saw a woman emerge from the back seat, a pistol clutched in her shaking hands. The man was shouting something, but the words were drowned out by the ringing in my ears. I scrambled for my fallen weapon, but a boot came down hard on my wrist. The man loomed over me, my gun now in his hand. "Don't move," he said, his voice tight with tension. "We don't want to hurt you any more than we have to." I lay there, the cold asphalt pressing against my cheek, my mind racing. This wasn't a simple car breakdown. This was something far more dangerous. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pain. "Whatever you're involved in, we can work this out. Just put the guns down and we can talk." The man and woman exchanged a look. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Then a small voice came from inside the car. "Daddy? What's happening?" The man's face hardened. "We're leaving. Now." As the woman hurried back to the car, I made my move. Ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder, I lashed out with my legs, catching the man off guard. He stumbled, and I managed to knock the gun from his hand. We grappled on the ground, each fighting for control. I could hear the woman screaming, the child crying. The world had narrowed down to this desperate struggle. I managed to get the upper hand, pinning the man beneath me. "It's over," I gasped. "Don't make this worse than it already is." For a moment, I thought he was going to surrender. Then I saw his eyes flick to something behind me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The world exploded in pain and darkness. When I came to, I was alone on the side of the highway. My head throbbed, and my shoulder felt like it was on fire. The Chevy was gone, along with the family. My cruiser's radio crackled with concerned voices. Apparently, I'd missed several check-ins. As I waited for backup in the ambulance, I pieced together what I could of the night's events. The car, the family, the desperation in their eyes, it all pointed to something bigger, something dangerous. In the days that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, the full story emerged. The family had been on the run from a drug cartel, desperate to escape a life they'd been pulled into against their will. They'd seen me as a threat to their freedom, maybe even their lives. I couldn't condone what they'd done, but a part of me understood their desperation. The fear in that child's voice haunted me. Weeks turned into months. My shoulder healed, but something inside me had changed. Every stranded motorist, every routine traffic stop now carried the weight of potential danger. The trust I'd once had in the basic goodness of people had been shaken to its core. But I didn't quit. I couldn't. Because for every desperate family on the run, there were dozens of genuinely stranded motorists who needed help. For every hidden gun, there were countless people just trying to get home safely. So I go back out there night after night. I approach each stopped car with a mix of caution and hope. Because that's the job, that's what I signed up for. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night as I patrol that lonely stretch of highway, I find myself wondering about that family. Did they escape? Did they find the fresh start they were so desperately seeking? Or did their past catch up with them? I'll probably never know. But I hope for that child's sake that they found peace. And I hope that one day I'll be able to approach a stranded motorist without my hand instinctively moving to my gun. Until then, I'll keep patrolling. I'll keep stopping to help. Because out here on the highway, in the vast darkness between cities, sometimes we're all that stands between someone and disaster. Sometimes we're the only hope they've got. And if that means putting myself in harm's way, well, that's part of the job, too. Because every now and then, amid all the danger and uncertainty, we get to be the heroes. We get to make a difference. And on those nights, as I help a grateful family get back on the road safely, I remember why I do this. Why I put on the badge every day, despite the risks. Because out here on the highway in the darkest hours of the night, sometimes we get to be the light that guides people home. Story 11. The fluorescent lights of the gas station flickered, casting an eerie glow across the empty parking lot. It was 2:37 a.m. and I was running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. My eyelids felt like sandpaper, and the coffee I'd grabbed at the last stop had long since worn off. But I had to keep going. Just a few more hours, and I'd be home. I pulled up to the pump, the gravel crunching under my tires. The station seemed deserted, but a dim light in the convenience store window told me it was open. Thank God for 24-hour service. As I got out of the car, a gust of wind whipped through the lot, sending a shiver down my spine. Something about this place felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the exhaustion talking. I inserted my credit card and started pumping gas, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. That's when I noticed the car. It was parked near the store entrance, a nondescript sedan that I probably wouldn't have given a second glance in daylight. But now, in the harsh glow of the overhead lights, something about it caught my attention. The windows were fogged up, like someone had been sitting in it for a long time. And there was a figure inside, barely visible through the condensation. As I watched, the figure turned, and I caught a glimpse of a face. A man, probably in his 40s, staring directly at me. There was an intensity in his gaze that made my skin crawl. I quickly looked away, pretending I hadn't seen him. Just focus on the gas, I told myself. You'll be out of here in a minute. But I could feel his eyes on me, burning into the back of my head. I risked another glance. He was still staring, completely motionless. And was it my imagination, or had his car inched closer? The gas pump clicked off, making me jump. I replaced the nozzle with shaking hands, fumbling to screw the gas cap back on. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away as fast as I could. But I needed that receipt. Without it, I couldn't get reimbursed for the trip. And to get the receipt, I'd have to go inside the store. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. It's fine, I thought. You're just tired and paranoid. There's probably a perfectly innocent explanation for why that guy is sitting in his car at 2 a.m. staring at strangers. I walked towards the store, trying to project confidence. As I passed the sedan, I could swear I heard the engine turn over. But when I looked back, the car was still in the same spot, the man still watching me. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the store. The fluorescent lights were even harsher inside, illuminating rows of snacks and energy drinks with an almost painful clarity. Behind the counter stood a young man, barely more than a teenager, looking bored and slightly nervous. "Hi," I said, wincing at how loud my voice sounded in the quiet store. "I need to get a receipt for pump 3, please." The clerk nodded, tapping at his register. As he worked, I glanced back out the window. The sedan was still there, but now I could clearly see the man's face. He was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile a predator might give its prey. "Here you go," the clerk said, snapping me back to reality. He held out the receipt, but as I reached for it, I noticed his hand was trembling. That's when I saw it. A small notepad next to the register, partially hidden by a display of lighters. On it, scrawled in hasty handwriting, were the words, "Don't go back to your car." My blood ran cold. I looked up at the clerk, whose eyes were wide with fear. He gave an almost imperceptible nod towards the note. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The clerk's eyes darted to the window, then back to me. Yeah," he stammered. "Everything's fine. Did you, need anything else?" I got the message. Whatever was going on, he couldn't talk freely. "Actually," I said, a bit too loudly, "I think I'll grab a coffee for the road." I moved deeper into the store, pretending to browse the snack aisle while my mind raced. What the hell was happening? Why couldn't I go back to my car? And what did the clerk know that I didn't? As I pondered these questions, the bell above the door jingled again. I froze, a bag of chips halfway to my basket. Slow, deliberate footsteps moved across the linoleum floor. "Evening," a deep voice rumbled. "Just need to pay for some gas." I peeked around the edge of the aisle. The man from the sedan was standing at the counter, looming over the young clerk. Up close, he was even more intimidating, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold, dead look in his eyes. The clerk was visibly shaking now, his fingers fumbling with the register. "Which pump?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, I haven't pumped yet," the man said, his tone casual but with an undercurrent of menace. "Just getting some cash first. Say, you haven't seen anyone else come in here, have you?" "I thought I saw a woman enter a few minutes ago." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. The clerk's eyes flicked in my direction for just a second before he answered. No, sir, just you." The man leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. I strained to hear what he was saying, but could only catch fragments. "No, you're lying. Don't be a hero. Walk away now." I had to do something, but what? I was no match for this guy physically, and for all I knew, he could be armed. My eyes darted around the store, looking for anything I could use as a weapon or distraction. That's when I saw it. A rack of road maps near the front of the store, right next to a display of windshield wiper fluid. An idea began to form. Moving as quietly as I could, I crept towards the front of the store. I could hear the man still talking to the clerk, his voice growing more agitated. "Last chance, kid. Tell me where she is, or things are going to get real unpleasant for you." I took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and made my move. In one fluid motion, I grabbed a jug of wiper fluid and hurled it towards the front window with all my strength. The plastic container exploded on impact, sending shards of glass and blue liquid spraying everywhere. The noise was deafening in the quiet store. The man spun around, momentarily distracted. I seized my chance, grabbing an armful of maps and flinging them into the air. As papers fluttered down around us, I bolted for the door. I heard a roar of rage behind me as I burst out into the parking lot. My legs were moving before my brain could even process what was happening, carrying me away from my car and towards the darkness beyond the gas station. Heavy footsteps pounded behind me. He was giving chase. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. But I could hear him gaining on me. Just as I thought it was over, that he was going to catch me, I heard a new sound, sirens growing louder by the second. Red and blue lights began to flash in the distance. The footsteps behind me faltered, then stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the man sprinting back towards his car. By the time the first police cruiser pulled into the lot, he was peeling out, tires squealing as he disappeared into the night. I collapsed onto the gravel, gasping for air. As officers swarmed around me, asking questions I was too dazed to answer, I saw the young clerk emerge from the store. Our eyes met, and he gave me a shaky thumbs up. It wasn't until much later, after the adrenaline had worn off and I'd given my statement to the police, that I learned the full story. The man was a suspected serial killer responsible for a string of murders at gas stations across 3 states. The clerk had recognized him from a police bulletin and had been trying to warn me without tipping him off. As I finally drove away from the gas station, the sun peeking over the horizon, I couldn't stop thinking about how differently the night could have ended. How close I'd come to being another statistic, another victim in a madman's spree. I'd always thought of myself as a cautious person, someone who was aware of their surroundings. But that night taught me that danger can lurk in the most ordinary places, that evil can wear a mundane face. It taught me to trust my instincts, to be more vigilant. But most of all, it taught me the power of small acts of courage. That young clerk could have looked the other way, could have prioritized his own safety. Instead, he risked everything to warn a stranger. His bravery had saved my life. As I pulled into my driveway, exhausted but profoundly grateful to be alive, I made a vow. I would never again take my safety for granted, and I would strive to be the kind of person who would do for others what that clerk had done for me, to be brave in the face of danger, to stand up for what's right no matter the cost, because sometimes a simple warning can be the difference between life and death. Story 12. The smell hit me first. Sickly sweet, like rotting fruit mixed with something metallic. It was coming from the truck in the far corner of the lot, and it was getting worse every day. But that wasn't even the strangest part of what was about to become the longest week of my life. My name's Mike, and I've been the night janitor at the Sunset Ridge truck stop for going on 5 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and keeps me busy. Plus, I've always been a night owl, so the hours suit me just fine. You see all sorts of characters passing through a place like this. Long-haul truckers, families on road trips, the occasional drifter just looking for a warm place to spend the night. But in all my time here, I'd never seen anything quite like what happened that week in July. It started on a Monday. I remember because Mondays are always busy with all the weekend travelers heading home. I was making my usual rounds, mopping up spills in the diner and restocking the bathrooms when I first noticed him. He was sitting in a booth near the back, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Nothing too unusual about that. Plenty of folks stop in here to rest and recharge. But as I worked my way around the diner, I realized he hadn't moved in hours. Just sat there, staring out the window at the parking lot. I'm not one to pry into other people's business, but something about him set me on edge. Maybe it was the way his eyes never seemed to blink, or how his fingers tapped an irregular rhythm on the tabletop. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the week wore on, he became a fixture in the diner. Always in the same booth, always with that same cold cup of coffee. The waitresses started to gossip about him during their smoke breaks. "He gives me the creeps," I overheard Sally saying one night. "It's like he's not even really there, you know." I knew exactly what she meant. There was something off about the guy. Like he was wearing a human suit that didn't quite fit right. It was Wednesday night when I first noticed the smell. I was taking out the trash when a gust of wind carried it across the parking lot. At first I thought maybe a critter had crawled under one of the trucks and died. It happens sometimes out here in the middle of nowhere, but as I followed my nose, I realized it was coming from a specific vehicle, a big rig parked in the far corner of the lot. Now, it's not uncommon for truckers to leave their rigs here for a day or two while they catch some rest. But this one had been sitting in the same spot since Monday, and I hadn't seen anyone go near it. I approached cautiously, the stench growing stronger with each step. It was an older model Peterbilt, its once shiny blue paint now dulled by road grime. The curtains were drawn across the cab windows, but I could have sworn I saw them twitch as I got closer. Just as I was about to knock on the door, a voice behind me made me jump. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." I spun around to find the diner guy standing there. Up close, he looked even stranger. His skin had an almost waxy quality to it, and his eyes were like looking into empty space. "That truck," he continued, his voice oddly flat. "It's not your concern. Best to leave it be." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back towards the diner, his movements stiff and unnatural. I should have called the cops right then and there, should have reported the suspicious truck and the even more suspicious man. But something held me back. Fear, maybe, or morbid curiosity. Whatever it was, I decided to keep my mouth shut and my eyes open. Thursday night, things took a turn for the weird. I was cleaning the men's room when I heard voices coming from the manager's office. Now, Bobby, that's our manager. He's usually long gone by the time I start my shift, so hearing voices in there at 2 a.m. was definitely out of the ordinary. I crept closer, straining to make out the words. One voice I recognized as Bobby's, but the other, it was that same flat tone as the diner guy, but somehow different, colder. "Another one's getting suspicious," Bobby was saying, his voice tight with stress. "We can't keep this up much longer." "You'll do as you're told," the other voice replied. "The operation is too important to jeopardize now. Handle it." The door opened suddenly, and I barely had time to duck into a nearby supply closet. Through the crack, I saw Bobby exit, followed by a tall figure in a dark suit. It wasn't the guy from the diner, but there was something similar about the way they moved, the way they held themselves, like they weren't quite human. As they passed my hiding spot, I caught a whiff of that same sickly sweet odor from the truck. My stomach churned, and I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to keep from retching. Once they were gone, I slipped out of the closet and made a beeline for the parking lot. I don't know what I expected to find, but I knew I had to check that truck again. The smell was even worse now, so strong it made my eyes water. I circled the vehicle, looking for any sign of what might be causing it. That's when I noticed the dark stains on the pavement beneath the trailer. Something was leaking, dripping slowly onto the asphalt. I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched one of the drops. It was sticky and warm, much warmer than it should have been on a cool night like this. In the dim glow of the parking lot lights, it looked black, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that in full daylight it would be red. Blood. The truck was leaking blood. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This was insane. Things like this didn't happen in real life, not in sleepy truck stops off Highway 40. I needed to call the police, A hand clamped down on my shoulder, iron strong and ice cold. I tried to scream, but another hand covered my mouth, muffling the sound. Now, a voice whispered in my ear. It was the diner guy, but his tone had changed. Gone was the flatness, replaced by something almost hungry. "We can't have you causing a fuss, can we?" not when we're so close to completion. I struggled, but it was like fighting against a statue. He dragged me backwards towards the diner. As we passed the office, I saw Bobby standing in the doorway, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "I'm sorry, Mike," he said, not meeting my eyes. I didn't have a choice. The diner guy, though I was now certain he was anything but a normal guy, chuckled. "No one ever does," he said. "But don't worry. Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll be part of something greater than you can imagine." He pulled me into the diner, now dark and empty. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw that all the booths were occupied. But not by people. At least not anymore. They looked human at first glance, but there was something profoundly wrong about them. Their skin had that same waxy quality I'd noticed on the diner guy. Their eyes were empty, lifeless, and from each of them came that horrible, sickly sweet smell. "Beautiful, aren't they?" the thing holding me whispered. "The next stage of human evolution. No more pain, no more fear. Just pure, perfect efficiency." I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from this nightmare. But as he forced me into one of the booths, I knew with horrifying certainty that this was all too real. "Don't worry," he said, his face splitting into a grin that was far too wide, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. "The process is mostly painless, and when it's done, you'll thank us. They all do in the end." As consciousness began to fade, my last thought was of the truck in the parking lot. How many others had met this fate? How long had this been going on? And most terrifying of all, how far had it already spread? The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was the sound of an engine starting up. The truck was on the move again, ready to bring its horrific cargo to the next unsuspecting town. And as for me, well, I guess I'll be joining the night shift in a whole new way from now on. Story 13. I've been an Uber driver for 3 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Drunk college kids, bickering couples, even the occasional celebrity. But nothing could have prepared me for the night I picked up John. What started as a simple long-distance trip turned into a descent into madness that I wasn't sure I'd survive. It was a slow Tuesday night. I'd been parked outside a popular bar district, scrolling through my phone and debating whether to call it quits, when the ping came through. A long-distance ride, surge pricing in effect. The payout would be enough to cover my rent for the month. I hit accept without a second thought. The pickup point was a dimly lit street corner on the outskirts of town. As I pulled up, I saw a lone figure standing under a flickering streetlight. He was tall and thin, with a shock of unruly dark hair. A battered duffel bag sat at his feet. "John?" I called out as he approached the car. He nodded, a tight smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for coming. I know it's a bit out of the way." I helped him load his bag into the trunk, then we both got in. The app showed the destination as a small town about 3 hours away. It was going to be a long night, but the pay would be worth it. We set off, the city lights fading behind us as we merged onto the highway. John was quiet at first, staring out the window with an intensity that was slightly unnerving. I tried to break the ice with some small talk. "So what takes you out to the middle of nowhere this time of night?" He turned to look at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? Desperation? It was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. "Family emergency," he said tersely. "My sister, she's in trouble." I nodded sympathetically. "I hope everything turns out okay." He didn't respond, just turned back to the window. The silence stretched on, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional ping from my phone. About an hour into the trip, John suddenly sat up straight. "We need to make a detour," he said, his voice tight with urgency. I frowned. "Sir, I can't deviate from the route in the app. Company policy." "Please," he said, leaning forward. "It's important. I'll pay extra." Against my better judgment, I agreed. He directed me off the highway and onto a series of increasingly narrow and isolated roads. The buildings became sparse, then disappeared entirely, replaced by dense forests on either side. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, unable to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "Just a little further," John muttered, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. That's when I noticed it. A pair of headlights in the distance behind us, gaining ground quickly. John saw them too. "Faster," he urged. "We need to lose them." My heart began to race. Lose who? What's going on? But John wasn't listening. He was fumbling with his duffel bag, pulling out something that made my blood run cold. A gun. Drive, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Don't stop for anything. My mind was reeling. Who was this man? What had I gotten myself into? I thought about making a break for it, but we were miles from anywhere, and he had a gun. I had no choice but to do as he said. I pressed down on the accelerator, taking the winding road as fast as I dared. The headlights behind us grew closer, then faded as we rounded a bend. For a moment, I thought we'd lost them. Then John let out a string of curses. They're still on us. Take the next right. I turned sharply, tires squealing in protest. We were on a dirt road now, branches scraping against the sides of the car. The ride was rough, and I struggled to keep control. Who are they? I managed to ask between white-knuckled turns. John's laugh was hollow. Let's just say I'm not exactly popular with certain people. People who don't like it when you know too much. Great, I thought. I'd picked up some kind of whistleblower or corporate spy, and now I was in the middle of a high-speed chase in the backwoods of nowhere. The road ahead forked. Which way? I asked, panic rising in my throat. John hesitated, indecision clear on his face. Left, he said finally. I took the turn and my heart sank. The road ended abruptly at the edge of a steep ravine. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop mere feet from the drop. Shit, John muttered. He was out of the car in an instant, gun in hand, scanning the trees behind us. I sat frozen, my hand still gripping the wheel. This couldn't be happening. Any minute now I'd wake up in my bed and this would all be a bad dream. But the sound of approaching engines told me this was all too real. 2 black SUVs burst into the clearing, boxing us in. John leveled his gun at them. Stay in the car, he ordered me. No matter what happens, don't get out. Men in dark suits poured out of the SUVs, their own weapons drawn. My car was caught in the middle of a standoff straight out of an action movie. It's over, John, one of the men called out. Give us the drive and we can end this peacefully. John's laugh was bitter. You know I can't do that, Frank. Too many lives at stake. I ducked down in my seat as the first shots rang out. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Glass shattered, and I felt something hot graze my arm. Through the chaos, I heard John's voice. Drive, now! Without thinking, I stomped on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, straight towards the ravine. At the last second, I wrenched the wheel to the side. We sideswiped one of the SUVs, metal screaming against metal. Somehow we broke free. I didn't dare look back, just focused on the road ahead, weaving through the trees at breakneck speed. You're bleeding, John said, his voice oddly calm. I glanced down. My sleeve was soaked with blood. The adrenaline must have masked the pain of the bullet graze. Keep pressure on it, he instructed, pressing a wadded-up shirt against my arm. There's a town about 20 miles ahead. We'll get you patched up there. My mind was spinning. What the hell is going on? Who were those people? What have you gotten me into? John was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. I'm sorry. I never meant for an innocent person to get caught up in this. Those men, they work for people who think they're above the law. I have evidence that could bring down their whole operation. That's what they're after. I laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. So I'm harboring a fugitive now? Great, just great. I'll turn myself in, John said. Once we get to town, I'll make sure they know you had nothing to do with this. You'll be cleared of any wrongdoing. I wanted to believe him, but a part of me knew it wouldn't be that simple. I'd seen their faces. I was a loose end now. We drove in tense silence, every shadow on the road looking like a potential ambush. When the lights of the town finally appeared in the distance, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. John directed me to a small clinic on the outskirts of town. As we pulled into the parking lot, he turned to me, his face solemn. I meant what I said. I'll make this right, but first I need to make sure this information gets to the right people. Lives depend on it. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Despite everything, I saw the conviction in his eyes. Whatever he was involved in, he believed it was worth the risk. What do you need me to do? I heard myself asking. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Just get yourself patched up. I'll handle the rest. As I watched him walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the small town, I realized my life would never be the same. The simple Uber driver I was at the start of the night was gone. In his place was someone who had glimpsed a world of secrets and danger, someone who now had a choice to make. I could try to forget everything that had happened, go back to my normal life and pretend this night was just a bad dream. Or I could step into the unknown, try to uncover the truth behind John's mysterious mission. As I walked into the clinic, my arm throbbing and my mind reeling, I knew which choice I would make. Because some rides don't end when the passenger leaves the car. Some rides change your destination forever. And this, I realized as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, was just the beginning of my journey. Story 14. The smell of grease and onions hung heavy in the air as I wiped down the countertop for what felt like the 100th time that night. The neon sign outside flickered, casting an eerie red glow through the food truck's windows. It was 2:43 a.m., and in 17 minutes we'd finally be closed. "Hey, Mike," my coworker Jess called from the back. "You think we'll make it through the night without another drunk trying to climb through the window?" I chuckled, remembering last weekend's fiasco. "Don't jinx it. I'm not in the mood to play bouncer tonight." The truth was, I wasn't in the mood for anything except crawling into bed. My feet ached, my eyes burned, and the constant hum of the generators was giving me a headache. But rent was due next week, and beggars can't be choosers when it comes to graveyard shifts. I glanced at my watch again. 2:47 a.m. So close. That's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. A woman's scream, quickly muffled, coming from somewhere in the dimly lit parking lot. Jess poked her head out from the back, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, already moving towards the window. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered here and there. At first I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then a movement caught my eye. A woman was running towards our truck, her face a mask of terror. She was disheveled, clothes torn, and there was something dark. Was that blood smeared on her cheek? Behind her, emerging from the shadows, was a man. Even from this distance, I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. "Oh shit," I breathed. "Jess, call 911, now." The woman reached our truck, pounding on the side with frantic energy. "Please," she sobbed. "Please let me in. He's going to kill me." For a split second, I hesitated. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. What if this was a trap? What if letting her in put us all in danger? But the fear in her eyes was real. The blood on her face was real. And the man approaching with purposeful strides was all too real. I made a decision. "Back up," I shouted to the woman as I moved to the service window. With trembling hands, I unlatched it and pushed it open. "Come on, hurry." She didn't need to be told twice. With surprising agility, she hoisted herself up and scrambled through the window. I slammed it shut just as the man reached the truck, his face contorted with rage. "Open up," he roared, slamming his fist against the side of the truck. The whole vehicle shook with the impact. "Give her to me, or I swear to God I'll kill you all." The woman cowered in the corner, wrapping her arms around herself. Up close, I could see she was younger than I'd first thought, maybe early 20s. Her lip was split and swollen, and a nasty bruise was forming around her left eye. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're safe now. We've called the police." "Like hell she is," the man outside bellowed. There was a screech of metal on metal as he tried to pry the window open. Jess appeared from the back, her face pale. "Police are on their way," she whispered. 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. It might as well have been 5 hours. The man outside was growing more frenzied, alternating between threats and attempts to break in. Each impact made the truck sway, and I found myself wondering how long our flimsy locks would hold. "We need to do something," Jess hissed. "We can't just wait for him to get in." She was right, but what could we do? We were food truck workers, not action heroes. I looked around desperately for anything we could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on the deep fryer still bubbling away. An idea formed, a crazy, dangerous idea, but it was all we had. "Jess," I said, keeping my voice low, "I need you to get that big pot we use for chili, and oven mitts, lots of oven mitts." Her eyes widened as she realized what I was planning. "Mike, that's insane. You could really hurt someone. You got a better idea?" I shot back. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and disappeared into the back. I turned to the young woman who was watching us with a mixture of fear and confusion. "What's your name?" I asked gently. Amy," she stuttered. "Okay, Amy, I'm Mike. We're going to get you out of this, I promise. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" She nodded, wiping away tears with a shaking hand. Jess returned with the pot and mitts. I quickly explained my plan. It was risky, but it was our only shot. The man outside had gone quiet, which worried me more than the yelling. I peered out the window and saw him retrieving something from his car. My heart sank as I recognized the shape of a tire iron. "We need to do this now," I said. Jess and I put on as many oven mitts as we could fit, then carefully transferred the scalding oil from the deep fryer to the pot. The smell of grease became overwhelming in the confined space. "Amy," I said, "when I give the signal, I need you to open that window as fast as you can, then drop to the floor immediately. Understand?" She nodded, moving into position with shaky determination. We heard footsteps approaching. A shadow fell across the window. "Now!" I yelled. Several things happened at once. Amy flung open the window and dropped. The man's face appeared, twisted in triumph as he thought he'd found a way in. And Jess and I heaved the pot of oil forward with all our might. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then the screaming started. The man staggered back, howling in agony as the hot oil covered his face and chest. He dropped the tire iron and fell to his knees, clawing at his burning skin. I slammed the window shut, my stomach churning at what we'd just done. But there was no time for regrets. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Is he? Amy whimpered from the floor. "He's alive," I assured her, though I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. "The police are almost here. It's over." The next few hours passed in a blur. Police swarmed the parking lot. Paramedics treated the man for severe burns before taking him into custody. Amy was taken to the hospital, but not before thanking us through tears for saving her life. Jess and I gave our statements, explaining over and over that we'd acted in self-defense. Eventually, a tired-looking detective told us we were free to go, but should expect to be called in for further questioning. As we finally locked up the food truck, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. Jess and I stood in silence for a moment, the events of the night weighing heavily on us. "You know," Jess said finally, "I always thought working the late shift was boring as hell. Be careful what you wish for, I guess." I laughed, but it came out sounding more like a sob. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and nauseous. "Yeah, I think I prefer boring." We parted ways in the parking lot, both too exhausted for much conversation. As I drove home, my mind kept replaying the night's events. The woman's terrified face, the man's screams as the oil hit him, the weight of the decision I'd made in that split second. I knew I'd done the right thing. We'd saved Amy's life, stopped a violent attacker, but the memory of his agonized cries would haunt me for a long time to come. As I finally crawled into bed, the sun now fully risen, I found myself thinking about how quickly life can change. How a routine night at a dead-end job can suddenly become a life-or-death situation. How ordinary people can be forced to make extraordinary choices. I thought about Amy, hoping she was safe, that she'd find the strength to heal from this trauma. I thought about the man, wondering what dark path had led him to this point, and if he'd ever find redemption. But mostly I thought about Jess and myself. How in that moment of crisis we'd found a courage we didn't know we possessed. How we'd acted not as individuals, but as a team, united in our determination to protect an innocent life. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. We are all capable of heroism, even in the most unlikely places. Sometimes it just takes a desperate situation to bring it out. I knew the coming days would be difficult. There would be more questions, possibly legal complications. The emotional toll would be heavy. But I also knew that whatever came next, I'd face it with the same determination I'd found in those terrifying moments in the food truck. Because sometimes the most important orders we fill aren't on any menu. They're the ones that test our humanity, our courage, and our capacity for compassion in the face of darkness. Story 15. The moment I lost radio contact, I knew this was no ordinary call. 20 years on the force hadn't prepared me for what I was about to face at that seemingly innocent highway rest stop. Sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones we're chasing, but the ones waiting for us when we arrive. My name is Detective Sarah Reeves, and this is the story of the night that changed everything. It started as a routine call, as they often do. Dispatch radioed in about a suspicious person at the Pinewood Rest area, just off Highway 101. Nothing too out of the ordinary. We get calls like this all the time. Usually just some poor soul down on their luck or a teenager trying to look tough. I was already in the area wrapping up a minor fender bender, so I told dispatch I'd swing by and check it out. The sun was setting as I pulled into the rest stop, casting long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. A few truckers were catching some shut-eye in their rigs, but otherwise the place was deserted. That's when I saw him. He was standing by the vending machines, a young man in his early 20s maybe, with wild eyes and clothes that looked like he'd been wearing them for days. As soon as he spotted my cruiser, he started waving his arms frantically. I approached cautiously, one hand resting on my holster. You never know in situations like these. "Sir," I called out, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I'm Officer Reeves. Is everything all right?" He rushed towards me and I tensed, ready to draw my weapon if needed. But as he got closer, I saw the tears streaming down his face, the raw terror in his eyes. "Please," he gasped, grabbing my arm. "You have to help me. They're after me. They'll be coming back any minute." "Slow down," I said, gently removing his hand. "Who's after you?" He shook his head violently. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Nobody does. But they're real, and they're coming. We have to leave. Now." I've dealt with my fair share of paranoid individuals, but something about this guy's fear felt genuine. Still, protocol is protocol. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down and tell me exactly what's going on. Are you in some kind of trouble?" He laughed, a high, hysterical sound that sent chills down my spine. "Trouble? Lady, you have no idea. I've been running for days. They took everyone else. I'm the only one left." "Who took everyone?" I pressed, trying to make sense of his ramblings. "Are we talking about a kidnapping situation?" He opened his mouth to respond, but his eyes suddenly went wide, focusing on something behind me. Before I could turn, he let out a blood-curdling scream and took off running towards the tree line at the edge of the parking lot. I spun around, half expecting to see armed assailants. Instead, I saw nothing. Just an empty rest stop bathed in the fading orange light of sunset. "Sir," I called out, starting after him. "Stop, I'm trying to help you." But he was already disappearing into the woods. Cursing under my breath, I jogged back to my cruiser and grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment. I radioed dispatch to send backup. Whatever was going on here, I had a feeling I was going to need it. "This is Officer Reeves at Pinewood Rest Area. I've got a possible 5,150 male subject fled into the woods, requesting backup and K-9 unit if available." There was a burst of static, then dispatch's voice came through, garbled but understandable. "Copy that, Officer Reeves. Backup is en route. ETA 15 minutes. I clicked off the radio and headed towards the trees. The smart move would have been to wait for backup, but something in that kid's eyes haunted me. If he really was in danger, those 15 minutes could mean the difference between life and death. The woods were thick, the undergrowth catching at my uniform as I pushed through. I swept my flashlight back and forth, searching for any sign of the young man. "Police," I called out. "I'm here to help. Where are you?" For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, I heard what sounded like sobbing coming from up ahead. I moved towards the sound, my free hand resting on my holster. I found him huddled at the base of a massive oak tree, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking back and forth. As my flashlight beam fell on him, he looked up, his face a mask of terror and relief. "You followed me," he whispered. "I didn't think you would." I crouched down next to him, keeping a bit of distance just in case. "Of course I did. It's my job to help people in trouble. Now, can you tell me what's going on? Who are you running from?" He shook his head, eyes darting around the darkening woods. "You'll think I'm crazy. Everyone does." "Try me," I said, offering what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "I've seen a lot in my time on the force. Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." He took a deep, shuddering breath. Okay. It started about a week ago. I was on a road trip with some friends. We stopped at this little town for gas, and something felt off. The people there, they weren't right. They looked human, but their eyes, God, their eyes were empty. And they all moved in this weird, synchronized way, gay. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. It sounded like the plot of a bad sci-fi movie, but the fear in his voice was real enough. We tried to leave, but our car wouldn't start. And then they came for us, my friends. They took them. I managed to escape, but they've been chasing me ever since. They look like normal people, but they're not. They're something else, something inhuman. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. Before I could respond, my radio crackled to life. "Officer Reeves, this is dispatch. Do you copy?" I reached for my radio, but only static came through when I tried to respond. The young man's eyes went wide. "They're here," he whispered. "They can do that. Cut off communications." I was about to tell him that was impossible when I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps, dozens of them, moving through the woods with eerie synchronization. And then I saw them. They emerged from the darkness like something out of a nightmare. Men, women, even children, all moving with the same unnatural grace. Their faces were blank, expressionless, and their eyes... God, their eyes were just as the young man had described. Empty, lifeless, yet somehow hungry. I scrambled to my feet, drawing my weapon. "Police! Stop right there!" They didn't even slow down. I fired a warning shot into the air, but it was like they didn't even hear it. They just kept coming, their movements fluid and purposeful. "Run!" the young man screamed, grabbing my arm. "They won't stop. We have to go." Every instinct I had honed over 2 decades as a cop was screaming at me to stand my ground, to try to reason with these people. But as I looked into those empty eyes, I knew there would be no reasoning, no negotiation, only survival. We ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. We tore through the woods, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. But no matter how fast we went, I could hear them behind us, not running, not even hurrying, just that same steady, synchronized movement, inexorable, unstoppable. We burst out of the tree line back into the rest stop parking lot. My cruiser was right where I'd left it, and I've never been so happy to see a vehicle in my life. "Get in!" I yelled, fumbling for my keys. The young man didn't need to be told twice. He dove into the passenger seat as I cranked the engine. It roared to life just as the first of our pursuers emerged from the woods. I threw the car into drive and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I could see them flooding out of the trees. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all moving with that same terrible purpose. As we sped down the highway, putting distance between us and whatever the hell those things were, I tried my radio again. Nothing but static. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd just seen. The young man, I still didn't even know his name, was slumped in the passenger seat, his eyes closed, tears streaming down his face. "What do we do now?" he whispered. I wish I had an answer for him. In all my years on the force, I'd never encountered anything like this. Never seen anything that shook me to my very core the way those empty eyes had. All I knew was that we couldn't stop, couldn't risk them catching up to us. So I pressed down on the accelerator, watching the speedometer climb. "We keep moving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And we warn everyone we can. Whatever those things are, wherever they came from, they're not going to stop with us." As the miles flew by and the adrenaline began to fade, one thought kept echoing in my mind. How do you fight an enemy that looks just like everyone else? How do you know who to trust when the monsters wear human faces? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for certain. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same again.